joined by my esteemed colleagues, Mike, Neelofer, and Angeline. Can we have our PowerPoint, please? Okay, perfect. All right. So before we get started with our lesson, or with our session, it's going to be a very interactive session. I hope all of you participate, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview of who we are and what we do. I don't need a mic. Yeah, this is a small room. I think we're good. Yes. So you may have heard of us. We are a global community of over 10,000 members from over 165 countries. We're researchers, practitioners, policymakers, all working within the realm of agriculture and food systems, trying to improve nutrition and health. So our goal is to create an interdisciplinary community to support the development of new research, to build capacity within our community, and facilitate uptake of science into policy and practice. And we do that through all of our various programs. So we have working groups, we have CGIAR, which is basically a resource on our website that has different resources to support all the different steps of research. We have this Training of Trainers program, which we'll be talking about today. And we also have Academy Week, which is probably what we're most well known for. It's a week of learning labs followed by a week of research conference, and it is now hybrid. So, shameless plug, we have an Academy Week next year in Tanzania. If any of you are interested in hosting a learning lab or a side event, applications are still open, and they're due in January, so just for anyone interested. So now we'll get started. This conference is all about connecting the dots across systems, and we talk a lot about how we can't address these wicked problems of malnutrition through just looking at things from one sector or one discipline. And that is why interdisciplinarity is so important. I think this is something that we all know and we've spent, this week discussing. So acknowledging that, interdisciplinary is so important, we created this curriculum enrichment working group because unfortunately, I think a lot of our education systems don't necessarily take this approach. A lot of programs are very siloed, like if you're a nutrition major, you take nutrition courses. It's not really, you don't really get all these courses and all these different topics, but that are important in addressing nutrition. So we had a lot of feedback from our community. As you know, we have Academy Weeks, and during this time we have things called learning labs as well as this. And there was a demand for the people were saying, like, this is really great, we would like more of this, but this only happens once a year and it's very limited. So are there other opportunities to learn about, different disciplines, and where can we get resources for all of this? But there's just so much information out there. So we decided that we would conduct a needs assessment, and we reached out to lecturers from across the globe to find out whether or not, is this something that people want, and what kind of support can we give them. So we developed this needs assessment, and we sent it out to around 140 lecturers, and of that 140, only one person said they don't see a demand for interdisciplinary teaching and learning. About half of them said, yes, I'm personally motivated to do this. There's also demand from students, from institutions, from conferences like this one. But yet, this is not necessarily reflected in our schools. And why is that? We said that it doesn't fall into the curriculum. There aren't resources available, and a lot of these people don't, they're not experts in all of these different topics, so they would have to learn these topics themselves before they teach it to their students. And this is a group from one of our focus groups, quote, saying, at some level we're inclined towards interdisciplinary work, but it's very difficult to be an expert in agriculture, nutrition, and health. But there's a need for this kind of thing to be bridged either by people within the institution, or at least having materials which should give us some insights on how this is done. And this is just what resources educators would like me to use. So from this, we published this paper talking about the barriers and enablers of interdisciplinary. And I think it just echoes what we already know from this. Like, yeah, we already know that when you have siloed training, siloed expertise, you have siloed policy making and programming, and it doesn't, they can't really address these issues. So from this, we developed, on our website, we have teaching and learning resources. So these are all free. You can go to our website now and you can find journals, lecture slides, free courses, games, readings. And we also developed these 4 training modules. So these are modules in agriculture, nutrition, and health linkages, One Health, gender equity and empowerment, and climate change, sustainability, and the environment. And these are just meant to be kind of introductory courses to these topics that anyone can use. They're meant to be adapted, so you can take it, you can maybe take a slide, put it in your lecture, or you can take the whole thing and kind of curate it towards your students. These are meant to be free resources that everyone can use. And we also created this Training of Trainers program. And now I'm going to invite Mike to talk a bit more about what this program entails and what we hope to see from it.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so as Chow mentioned, we curated these 4 modules, but it was clear to us that what we wanted to do was to make sure that they were able to be adapted to people's contexts. And we're going to try that out later on, but to show you that, we wanted to go that little bit more depth. So we came up with the idea of training master trainers who would then work with the A&H people to train regional trainers. And then those regional trainers would work with students and send us their feedback as to what happened. And I thought that was quite an interesting process. We've got 2 of our master trainers here, Nilofer and Anjali, and they're going to tell us a little bit about their experience. This was the workshop that we held earlier this year in South Africa. I think there were 25 participants from about 12 different countries. And very interesting there. So they are now our regional trainers in Africa, and they're now sending in their experiences of training their students. So we're gathering lots of material from what they've done. This was last week in the Hilton Hotel. We spent a week there with 25 participants from different countries in Asia, doing the same thing. That is introducing the students, the regional trainers, to the material, but also thinking about this adaptation. And I just wanted to focus on that. So just to share with you what we were trying to do with this, see if this makes sense. Our focus with regional trainers is about adapting the material to suit the context, their context. Now that might be in terms of how their students learn, it might be in terms of case studies, it might be in terms of the emphasis for that thing. So it's got to be something which really makes sense to those students. And we did a lot on that. The second thing is that we wanted to talk about how students and trainees learn most effectively. And we did that by looking at some of the evidence base around that. We had an academic paper from Uganda and an academic paper from Pakistan, which talked about what students valued most about their teachers at university. And it was interesting. What came out was this issue around student-centered learning, issue around I want to be engaged, I want to have a rapport with my lecturer, so that if I don't understand what bias means, or I'm not sure, I can raise my hand without feeling stupid and say, excuse me, am I right in thinking this? Yeah? And we unravelled that in those 2 weeks, because we worked out that to be able to do that, that student needs to have faith that the lecturer's not going to show them. Yeah? And all of the students don't feel embarrassed. So we talked a lot about engagement, rapport, and a sense of belonging. We also wanted the master trainers to reflect during the sessions around that. And at the end, what they were asked to do as part of their assessment was to adapt a session plan for a context of their choosing. So there were 6 aspects that we have been exploring with the master trainers and the regional trainers, because the material is fine from A&H. We've got the slides, we've got a plan, but the slides tend to be around content, and they tend to be around, here's a lecture and then there's a case study. So we wanted to try and make that more realistic, and thinking about asking people how might you engage the students before the session. I'm putting trainees there because a lot of people are now talking about trainees out in the field, could be people doing their research, or increasingly people talking about policymakers being involved in some of these sessions. So I think we're just kind of at the beginning of this. So how would you engage people before a session? How might you engage students at the beginning, and maybe modifying the learning outcomes, because there may be something that are too basic, or they're too advanced for their students, so they're able to change them. And then how would you engage students during a lecture? Of course, that's a really interesting issue, and we talked quite a lot about that with staff, about how they would do that. And we did, and also then talked about group work, thinking of the case study and things like that. And then how would you engage students with the take-home points and in some kind of post-session evaluation, which wasn't your usual how do you think it went. It was more looking at 3 months later, has that session made a difference to how you see this particular topic? And we do this by getting the students to experience what it's like. So Nilofer and Anjali taught them about the module, so they're there as students, but then they're also discussing with me, how did Anjali and Nilofer do those things that I've just talked about on the previous slide? How did they engage you? How did they get you to have a sense of belonging? Then we ask the regional trainers to plan a session. They have to present it, they have to discuss the feedback from that, and then they'll have to think about how they would evaluate that further session. And at the end of that week, they do that, and then we give them a certificate as an accredited regional trainer. So it's really quite a practical thing, but it's absolutely based in kind of evidence around what would be most effective in their particular context. So we thought it would be very interesting, just for 5 minutes each, to hear from Anjali and Nilofer about their experience as master trainers, possibly talking about this idea of adapting the plans from the NH. I don't know who would like to go first.
I can go. So I'm Nilofer Sabdar, and it was just last week that I went through this process. So I've already been trained as a master trainer through 4 online sessions from the ANH team. And all I can say is that this was an experience of not just understanding the linkages between agriculture, nutrition or health, and the modules that were given to us was very well structured, but the bottom line that I learned through this program was, how do you deliver lectures? How do you teach people? Or what does the learner wants from you? So it was not just the linkages that we were trying to understand, but it was more so, how do I as a teacher qualify, because the students that I'm teaching is also taking the matter that I'm giving them. So how do you do group activity? How do you engage the students in a group? Or how do you make sure that it's an inclusive teaching? It's not a biased teaching, that you're only treating the frontline people. You're not looking at the back, the students who are not responding to the questions. So it was more like reflecting back on what I think I can improve as a teacher. And then plus these 5 modules are very good, especially if we want to connect the dots. It was a very comprehensive content, but needed some modification because of the cultural, social, and the spectrum context within where I would work. So let's say if I'm from Pakistan and if I'm going to deliver this lecture, last week I had to modify the module suiting to the group that I was teaching. So I was teaching a group of people who were from Southeast Asia. So I had to make sure that my slides reflect those that group that I'm teaching. I'm interacting with, their statistics, their backgrounds, or some scenarios in the case studies which reflects from where they are coming. So that is very important, and so that makes the students or the recipients that they are inclusive. If I give them the data from the Western studies, then they won't feel close by. I mean, they won't feel that this is reflection of what they have been experiencing in their own countries. So this is a process, and I think I honestly would encourage you to visit the website, ANH website, and just using the resources from there and the opportunities available over there is really, you will be amazed with how much we can learn through that. And if you can have an opportunity of going through this program where they train master trainers or regional trainers, then I would consider you very lucky for that. Thank you.
I'm Anjali. I basically work in India with Center for Chronic Disease Control, and my background has been in nutrition. So first 20 years I totally worked in pure nutrition, and then I joined as a fellow for ANH Academy as a Imana fellow, and from there my journey of interdisciplinary learning started. First few years I was just listening, and this was an opportunity to take it ahead from there. The first lesson which I learned while working as a master trainer, that the people with whom I'm going to discuss and develop them as regional trainers, they themselves are very experienced in their fields. So it is not like a teacher and student association. I may be learning few things from them. We are just going to introduce you to the pedagogical concepts which you can develop in your own way. So we went through this training for past 6 months, in which we understood different concepts related to pedagogy, like the threshold concepts, how we can do the interdisciplinary learning and this thing. Everybody has their own way of looking at things, and we need to give that space while we are delivering sessions related to ANH. Somebody like from an economy background might be looking at it differently, somebody from nutrition might be looking at it differently. And that is why we can just introduce the concepts and give that space to understand and build up on their own understanding. So when we started these sessions last week, I covered Glover has already explained the process, how we went through and all these things. So we went through the sessions which are already available on the ANH websites. They have provided the PPTs for all 5 modules, including the concept of ANH, climate change, One Health, and other. You can go ahead, like when we go ahead with this session, we'll look at it. And we chose one of the concepts. I went for the climate change. And then, though we had been trained, it was a practical session wherein we had to adjust it according to our needs. So what I did during this session was that I wanted to speak about climate change, but I wanted to talk about food system. I'm a nutritionist. I was more comfortable to start with food system approach, and I knew, because I knew the background of people through the information, many of them were from public nutrition. So I adapted some of the slides to suit in that need. We went from simple to complex during the sessions, because it is not, you all can see that it is not very easy thing to understand interdisciplinary, though we say that we want to say it is not easy job. So we've started with simple things, included some of the videos which are available online, which are good source of information to start with and to cope up with. Then had some sessions in which we can have the groups thinking about it, that allows you to understand the concept yourself and take it to your own field. And finally we reached some of the difficult tasks, like thinking about policy and other things. From simple to complex, we could develop these approaches. So during handling the climate change, I knew that it's very much Asian concept of Panchamahabhut. the 5 elements that are there, and they are very much accepted in many of the Asian contexts. So I included that concept, but when it came to thinking about how I can include that concept with climate change mitigation and adaptation, that was a difficult task for me. Thanks to Thalia, along with whom I could do co-thinking about what exemplars could be developed and how I could explain them to different groups and how they will develop. So that was the process what we did last week, and we are taking you through the same thing in today's session. But it was very, very effective learning, because this is not like a classroom teaching wherein we have a subject matter and we just finish this is the task and this is done. We are supposed to induce thinking about it and taking it to practical level according to your own disciplines. So that is what we will do in today's session.
Thank you. Okay, so we thought, because it's a learning lab, that we'd like to have an activity for you, just to give you an idea of what we're doing with the regional trainers and master trainers. And one of the things that we've used has been the idea of threshold concepts. Here's a quote from Liz Cousin, who wrote this paper. We've got the reference there for you for later on when you have a look at the slides. But she talks about the curriculum is so full of stuff, that one of the ways of looking at it is to look at some of those threshold concepts, key concepts, that without which the student cannot move on. Yes? So we started to discuss that with the regional trainers and master trainers, and they seem to like the idea. The idea of a threshold concept is that it's transformative. It changes the way in which you see the subject. Yes, but it's also difficult. Some students may get it straight away. Other ones may take a month. Some people may take 2 months. How they talk to each other about it may be very crucial, actually. Once you've got it, then you can't remember what it was like before you had it. And that's why less experienced, say research fellows, are often in a much better position to talk to students, postgraduate students, about a threshold concept than a professor who may have understood it 40 years ago. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. So it's irreversible, it's integrative, it brings the discipline together, if you like, but it's also bounded by the discipline. So you get some people in some disciplines talking about a concept that wouldn't be like an English person, an English graduate thinking about bias or something like that. But it's also about talking, it's also about the language of the discipline. So I'm trying to give you some examples. Well, last week we came up with examples from our NH colleague. Climate change, they talked about mitigation and adaptation as a threshold concept for them. They talked about nutrition sensitive and nutrition specific. That was another kind of threshold concept. And they also talked about just the concept of One Health and equality and equity. Yes, those kind of concepts. So you're getting the idea that it's about this kind of idea of concept. So other colleagues, back in the UK where I teach, talk about the epidemiology, causal influence as a threshold concept, or confounding, or implementation research, or opportunity cost and economics, or market forces of supply and demand. Yes? This makes sense in terms of the threshold concept, and you might want to think about what's the threshold concepts in your discipline, and how do students get them, and how do they discuss them, if you like. So, bearing that in mind, we have this activity for you. Okay? And the activity, you could choose some of these things if you like, but what I'd probably like you to do would be on your table, and in a minute we'll get as many people on the table so it's kind of equal numbers. What I'd like you to do would be to discuss and decide on just one threshold concept from any discipline that could be introduced to a group of 20 postgraduate students from different disciplines in a 90-minute face-to-face session. Okay? So I suppose that's the first thing you're going to have to do on your table, is just to discuss and decide upon, for the sake of this activity, one threshold concept. It may be one of the ones that we've mentioned already, it could be something else. And then what I'd like you to do, using the pre-prepared flip chart, you see we've been in earlier, yeah? And on the flip chart, sketch out a plan using this, using this template. And you can see that the template takes us through. It's going to be for a 90-minute session, so in the end it's going to be 90 minutes here, but we'd like you to fill this in and complete it thinking about that session with the students. Some of it may be a lecture. We'd like you to introduce a case study for an example, so you might want to think about how you might do that. Yeah? And then at the end of that, you can take 20 minutes doing that, and then we'll just do a feedback, and each group will just tell us what they've done for that time. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So if you'd like to go onto the tables, first thing to do would be to discuss and identify the threshold concept that you'd like to plan a session for. Okay? Thank you.
Do they have any? I mean, do you have any questions on what Mike just said about this group activity before we embark on the group activity? Any question? I mean, do you understand what does he mean by threshold concept? So that, I mean, we are going to be here to guide you, but I feel it's important at the beginning, if you have any question, concerns, please go ahead. It's a very informal group. The purpose is to absorb what we are whatever little thing we will learn, not testing anybody or anyone, because even I had a difficult time when Mike was teaching me what is the threshold concept. So please feel free about it. Anyone?
Yeah.
Okay, so the examples of the threshold concept you have shown on a slide. So some of them are very broad, like if you want to think about both nutrition sensitive and nutrition specific interventions. So that's very broad. Or like sometimes like a little narrower scope, meaning, so for example.
No, it's a good point. So is the point.
So like how for a 90-minute face-to-face
No, I understand
session,
that. And some of these ones, of course, in a postgraduate year may take a term, a year to really understand. And
yes, yes.
So yes, you might be right. So probably best to choose one which is a little bit more specific. But it may be that it's just about introducing it to the students. Yeah? Okay. Yeah, it's an excellent point.
So for example, if I have to teach a group of students about dietary diversity. In nutrition, this is like a threshold, like initially we all talk about dietary diversity. So if I have to teach my student a 90-minute lecture on dietary diversity only, because this is like a threshold concept in nutrition, in diet and nutrition, right? Food. So this is how I would start my thing, okay? Or I just want to tell them what is nutrition specific programs, or what do you mean by nutrition specific. And this is a beginning student course, so how would I go about teaching them? Because these are the terms that they might need to use at a later stage in their university years, or even their program related interface interactions. So that's what, so in economics you can take any topic, any threshold concept, or
Okay, so you distribute around the table and get chatting. It's okay.
this is a table that they can outboard, isn't it?
Yeah, that's good.
This is a too big a table. Can we come with some of them? Yeah, I think we can use this as a board.
Thank you.
Would be really threshold for some of us and some of them.
I'm not. Can someone move from here? This I am.
Like in nutrition, like you wait for the
I will I can sell the comments and nutrition at my
Depends on what group you are and what you decide on. But
There must be an expert on that topic.
Not
Like
I think you all are involved in some kind of research. It's very easy to think about how we can go about it. We must have some that can possibly yeah, we don't have whatever confidence.
And there's also a big chunk now at the same child survival. So it's trying to focus that's it. I don't have concerns about controls. I work cross-functionally building these different strategies, define and try and plan the advocacy measures and think about what you want.
Organization works towards providing health vaccines for India. As we go ahead, we are there. So then I realized about what can be a simple more than introduction to what's anything that you picked up from today. I'll come back and walk you through. Understand how we have to understand what can you
I just got that. Design that provide concepts that should and bring forward
medical doctor from Sri Lanka. But I graduated from India. So I got a scholarship from Indian Ministry of Delhi, studying in Maharashtra. And currently I am doing a post-graduation and PhD candidate from the Medical Faculty University of Colombo. I'm non-communicable diseases, related literacy and promotive intervention researcher, post-graduation. So I'm focusing on the public health, three things, NCDs, health promotion and the literacy, development part of some tools and some promotive intervention. So the nutrition is kind of one of the domain in my tool, so that is kind of connecting with you all. So that's what I want to do.
I'm from a librarian. I'm from the West of Zambia. I work in the how you get the
think about the
but at the moment, whatever they need to call it yes. So my research in the past years has focused mainly on maternal and child nutrition, food security, and also coming up with complementary foods to try and address the issues of undernutrition among children.
So many non-communicable. We can talk about prevention of just
recently I developed a lot of interest in food environment.
very broad topic.
That's what I'm
in the school.
But we talked about like tobacco.
I talked about yes, but it also has multiple components in it.
You can even combine your
Sorry for being late, guys. I'm Indira. I actually work at ANH with these guys. I'm a research fellow at SHT, but I have decide on one threshold concepts
So it's a good idea.
Side of threshold concepts
Climate change, what you are thinking about.
I agree with you.
nutrition was what about like a key term maybe that might be this is the danger.
Think about anything in time. You can start looking for
So we need to find nutrition and
so do you have all these are the every discipline there are
I can give you examples.
meaning how you need to understand these things in order to move forward.
Or is
For example, as a dietary diagnosis, how close to
which type of
balance diet.
we
So that these are the terms that we normally use and as well as role in gender.
whom do you give presentation? Yes. Everybody knows that
What does gender relate to?
So, I guess the point was to try to researchers and how to explain across the board in a way that they would all understand.
What you have given research to?
I have given
In the
For example, one of the examples would be different between like
other researcher,
quality and quality, right? When you go through this session, that's something that then you will be able to know that
That's the thing that we will all learn should be very
or we do it the other way around, come out of it and think of something completely. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That makes it easier. Really well. All of us know the difference primarily we're talking about nutrition. We want vaccination. We want something else. It's very difficult within the limited license to survive at the threshold. So we just pick up with things. They should not introduce it's some publishers.
you want me to?
No, it's
I'll take notes. My handwriting is very bad.
They need to be. So, is there any confidentiality which comes to
Giving a presentation. I was not giving. I was designating one of my study. So the study was not actually elaborative or this was a basic that we showed. But our purpose was to engage the teachers and help them understand what is their position when they are incorporating that. During that time, while I was presenting, I was not presentation what is there in the design or what I was telling like that and it was kind of connecting to them that okay, so this is the and this will happen if this does. So it was more of a connecting to as a researcher when I talk to the audience, I think that people should connect with each other, then we will when we will be able to explain the things.
Now we have thought about it. Yeah, we can say about 90 minutes.
Yeah, because we have to try and exercise. I think let's not
Cover in those.
Yeah.
Okay. What will be your ILOs? Your topic is but maybe so maybe first thing what can be first thing what do you want your first dialogue? What will be your first dialogue? Is it up there? Or there can be on the set.
Don't worry too much because it's not like we have to teach it. Just pick any of them. Exactly, you don't have to announce it.
Introduction.
By the end of
So this is what curriculum design.
so now you can begin the session in 5 minutes. And then just finish it. You get to discuss it.
No,
Later
you
down.
write ILO 1 and ILO 2.
Yeah, I think so. What we can do is probably like each of us comes in like safe space that we think is like we were to get and what we can each of us
So that will be a first you already fine. And then second introduction. So introduction, I can do it for you guys. Linkage between.
But you can always try to
like overnight like artificial concept is
it could be anything.
Yeah. So in that, somehow you get the subject. What are we discussing session? The concept is there, but I one is because they want to talk. Second, you're going from study and participants. Now, think about how you will approach this. So you give them some
Yeah, like a scale.
before you meet them. After the scar, maybe in the brackets. After the split down there, we didn't mention before that line. After your iron, you can write down the So will you approach them how many days before you will check? Like 1 week before, try to start writing. After that, you will write. You mention before that line. Before the line, you can just mention from here to section planning will start. After the iron, you can mention 1 week before.
So essentially, we create our own discipline split related to the threshold concept.
No, you can just just need to be general.
Small, if I am talking about
Before
one,
going,
I should
7 week late, should be provide the report.
forward to advocacy. In my country, similar nutrients and
So you answer that question that you can mention. Before going to be
we have to plan the lesson. So we start off with the exercise we were discussing, right? Facilitate an open dialogue.
So
how would you approach it?
So you're really trying to think from the student's point of view, what are they going to experience if they do it? What do you want them to do for the first 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, one thing we did is like
Absolutely introduce themselves.
getting people to just put up words.
What do you want them to do?
So is that the ideal?
So it's trying to think, if you were delivering this session, how would you engage the students?
Everyone has like, you know.
So this one, between nutrition, what do you want them to do? Discuss it? Listen to it? Okay. Great. So it might be that you just put that in there. Yeah. So the first step I need to talk about what they learn, what they understand. What I'm trying to get to is at the end of the session, what do you want them to be able to discuss, find,
At 10 minutes, but then the first 5 minutes is for you to get to hear what they think, what's about 120 people, and then we just have depending on whether you're age virtually or
I think that's what you might want to think about. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, shout that out.
or on the whiteboard, you can write. If it's virtual, you use
You think about
one cloud, yes, exactly.
So, like you said, understand what you would like them to
Then you
understand.
first topic, then the next
Understand they
you can then highlight some of the keywords.
I've got the papers a week before. Now they're coming for your session. Once they entered the session, how will you interact with
asking them what they have understand from the research paper, learning about the
how will you spend 10 minutes of after the lecture? How will you facilitate that?
they will ask them to share their views and try to understand what made them interested in that.
There are 20 students. The group may not get to speak simultaneously. Exactly.
So we can
But they start from there and connect.
like the way.
Okay. Or they can use the meeting, they can use 10 minutes, 5 minutes. They can raise their hands. They can raise their hands. Stand up. Show the tell them to.
So, I don't know if I got this right, but the meeting will have two parts. For this presentation, first one is what is after which the second
How much time would you like to go with introductor?
and then another thing is actually what is
So, in the time, how much time do you need to develop this time? 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and then maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah,
So you can just,
Do it very quickly.
So what lecturers will do
But you could
develop a good
that's
That's fine. So develop a good
Based on the reading materials.
Yeah, just explain the procedure and then exactly what they are supposed to do. Whether they are supposed to stand, whether they are supposed to raise hands, what.
Or if you can think of like what is like.
What do we do?
And then after that, if the next slide is have like
Do we need any resources for this?
you use the application. That will be a resource. Now, we can write that as resource. Resource is application. What students are expected to do? They are expected to do the activity, participate in the group. I just giving first one so that combine the so students are charged for participate and download the list and participate.
Resource is multimedia.
So if it just
And what will you assess on the basis of this activity?
so this is ILO 1.
Right from consider that some of the
What will that tell you about students? Yeah, but basically you will understand how much students are understood till now, where they are. So understanding understanding what you will understand. You will understand how much students are understood regarding this subject. Have they been able to identify? So they need to use the writing.
But they were able to understand here.
And use the pencil. Okay, so we are done this first 10 minutes. And so you will also understanding of you can mention in so I think the group activity will take some time and then
15 plus 10 plus 15 and
No, I think it's good. I'll just spend a little bit of time there for that, and then you might want to make it that interactive,
No, I was thinking 15 plus 10 is the case study and report back. Will be interactive. You can mention that. Go fast. So 5 or 10 slides. How much time students are expected?
Almost repeats the same
Students what are the resources that you can listen and give the feedback. That will now minutes and plus 30 minutes. Just 30 minutes. Our exercise has not matched with the outcomes. We are looking at the first concept of environment by procedure, how you are interacting with the Can you call the second diet and what we would like to do that we are now defined, we are now understood. How would you now change by interactions?
But don't worry too much about it. I mean, time is important. How do you balance the activity? How do you want to feedback, assess that, and how does it connect to these ILO activities?
Because I'm also
It is linked with how is it linked with
Okay, we'll stop there. Okay, thank you.
And you will put them cut out. Break out and students are supposed to do that.
Okay, let's see how far we go.
Yeah, I'm interaction.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. Because it was a learning lab, I wanted to give you something to do, but we needed to give you something that was challenging and it's okay. Right, so can we listen, just someone from that group, just take us through what you discussed in your group, how far you've got. Who'd like to talk us through?
just whatever we discussed.
The topic the threshold topic that our group chose was One Health, and our objectives were, just a second, open my specs. So the object, okay, I'm going to stand for it. This is planned, but we're just going to follow this. So the objectives would the trainee should be able to define the concept of One Health by the end of the lecture, and also connect their own disciplines with the concept. So for that, for the 90 minutes that we had, the first based on the PPT that you presented to us before that, we realized that before there were activities that you could get the trainees to be involved in before the lecture. So for that, we thought we could send them pre-reads about the potential topics so that we could sensitize them a little bit beforehand. Then just before the lecture could actually start, we thought of giving them a Mentimeter to actually understand what does One Health mean to them according to each one of them, and maybe create like a word cloud of all of the responses that we get, and then again show it to them and highlight those things. Then the second thing is during the lecture,
we thought what we could potentially do is, after the word cloud has been created, the facilitator defines what One Health is and actually links it back to the responses that the trainees gave them, and then also has a framework to explain all of it, and then and also indulges the trainee in like potential contemporary case study. So say for example it's COVID-19. So we could what we could potentially do is give a case study for COVID-19 and ask each of the trainees, because they come from multidisciplinary backgrounds, as to how do you think your discipline could potentially have participated in the whole COVID-19 mitigation strategy. So to understand how it's such a broad concept and everyone has a role to play. And then finally, you split into groups, you do your activity, you come back together, and then you disseminate whatever you came up with, like I'm doing right now. And then finally, we allotted like 15 minutes for the facilitator to come back, debrief, again bring back the threads from the responses that they got, and how to engage the trainees after. We thought of having like a quick Q&A session just in case they had any doubts, and also come up with the feedback if anything that we did was effective at all or not.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you. This group, who would like to take us through what does? Thank you.
Learning objectives. So the threshold concept is the linkage between nutrition and non-communicable diseases, NCDs. So our two learning objectives were first to introduce nutrition and NCDs, and then to talk about the linkage between nutrition and NCDs. So we would start with, before the 90-minute session, a week prior to the actual training, we would share learning and introductory material to the students. So the material would be about nutrition and NCDs, basic concepts. Then at the beginning of the learning session, we have allotted 15 minutes where the students will be given a quiz on a mobile-based application to understand what the students have understood from the material that was shared, and also from their own readings and understanding. So the students will have to download and participate in the quiz, and what we want to assess is the baseline understanding of nutrition and NCD concepts among the students. Then we allotted 25 minutes for the lecturers to make like a slide deck of about 5 to 10 slides explaining the concepts of nutrition and NCDs, and then also save some time to get feedback from the students about our learning objectives, whether they want to modify them in any way. So the end of the sort of slide deck would be more interactive with the students. Then we planned for an interactive breakout activity. We did not discuss the time. I am going to allot 40 minutes. Where we would have breakout groups like we did today. And each group would have a flip chart with some cutouts to just think about what they think are the linkages between nutrition and NCDs. And once like all the groups are done making their own flip chart and drawing arrows for the linkages, we would come back and discuss what everyone's written, just to learn from all the groups. And I think we'd be left with 10 more minutes, which would just be like concluding, summarizing everything that was done, and hoping that everyone understood
So for us, at first when we started to identify the threshold concept, we looked at climate change, but because climate change was so broad, we decided to zoom in on a very specific concept in association with climate change, and that was what we have talked about, is nutrition dilution, and finding the linkages between nutrition dilution and climate change. So the ILOs was very simple for 20 students. First is like trying to understand what is nutrition dilution, what the concept means, defining the concept, and
gaining the better understanding. And then the next ILO that we wanted to see was students are now able to identify crops that actually do undergo nutrition dilution. Now, we did not go the full 90 minutes. We only managed to plan about 40 minutes of work. And there are some parallels with others because the first 15 minutes is actually gaining an understanding, like assessing what is the understanding before the start of the program. So 15 minutes by using Mentimeter to develop a word cloud, like just students coming together to throw their ideas together. And then the next 15 minutes is dedicated to the lecturer presenting this concept of nutrition dilution. So it's through PPT, through a PowerPoint presentation. Of course, how do you assess this is through the questions and answers that come from it. And then the next 10 minutes that we dedicated to was actually using video to zoom in on a case study. Because nutrition dilution is such a big topic also. So you want to go into a case study looking specifically like what this means for a particular crop. And that was where we reached. A little bit of a side discussion is, of course, the next course of action will be to have breakout groups for them now to then identify the crops. So they would have by themselves in the groups to work out an example and then using the remaining time to present it back to the group. So
you want to mention the case study that you thought would be very relevant? It would be interesting.
A case study that I thought would be very relevant. That was what we talked about in the video, was the selection of the Mexican dwarf wheat when it was introduced to India. So Borlaug brought that over together with Dr. M.S. Swaminathan. When they planted it, it was revolutionary. It was transformative, right? You get this wheat which is not so tall. It doesn't get blown down by the winds and everything. But to address this, there was also the other part of it, which was a trade-off. Now you're growing wheat, which is so plump, so fat, full of carbohydrate. But you need to eat probably 3 to 4 times of that wheat to gain 1 gram of the nutrient that you would have eaten from the traditional wheat that you have. So that was what we talked about as nutrition dilution.
Fantastic.
And of course in climate change there are many more examples because now you're selecting for longer roots, better yield, faster growing yield, 6 months instead of a full 9 months or a year. So those are the compromises, right?
Thank you.
Case study was very well chosen.
Hello everyone. So we decided in our group to conduct a session for a community group targeting the golden 1,000 days nutrition. So we actually want to challenge ourselves, and hence we decided it would be a traditionally unique group of fathers rather than mothers or caretakers in the community, and what roles they could play in improving the nutrition of 1,000 days mothers and infants. So the threshold concept is based on infant and young child feeding practice, and we basically discuss and create awareness amongst the fathers about the 3 E's of breastfeeding and dietary diversity or complementary feeding in the infants. And also just look into the different approaches of communication methods of delivering sessions into communities using innovative tools, one such being the NutriBeats bracelet that my organization CGIAR has tested and implemented in Nepal. So we'll use this as the tool to create awareness and education amongst the group of fathers. So we roughly sketched out the 90 minutes with the first 10 minutes by sharing the bracelet to all the 20 fathers who will be participating in this session. We'll ask them about what they initially think of the bracelet, the meaning behind it, and discuss amongst our group, and we'll need the bracelet as the resource. The next 10 minutes will be followed by the facilitator explaining about the concept of the golden 1,000 days and the significance it carries for the mother and the child and the nutrition of those groups. So there will be discussion and clarification and question and answers. And the third part, the next 15 minutes will be back and forth Q&A or discussion about what do you traditionally do in the 1,000 days. So we'll ask the fathers and assess how much they know about what it takes for a mother and a child to get proper nutrition in those first 1,000 days of the life. The next 15 minutes then will explain about the 3 E's, what are the exact 3 E's of breastfeeding and its significance or importance in the physical, mental and overall growth and development of the child. The next 15 minutes then we'll discuss about the diverse diet, the kind of dietary diversity a child needs in the first 2 years of his or her life. So for this, I think it will be followed by again the redistribution of bracelets and using this bracelet as a concept to reiterate the messages of 3 E's of breastfeeding and complementary feeding in the 1,000 days. And then they'll link the concept just like connecting the dots of whatever they listened to the previous session and using the bracelet as a tangible tool to recall and remind themselves of those messages. Finally, we'll close with the oh sorry, I missed one part. In the diverse diet session, so to engage the participants, we've thought of distributing a group of locally available different food groups, and we'll ask them to create a well-balanced plate of a diverse diet. What do they think of a diverse plate should comprise the major food groups? And then we'll use the bracelet to relink and compare whether the diet that they put out in that demonstrated plate is actually well balanced or diverse or not. So finally, the 15 minutes will ask the participants or the fathers to make a dietary plan about what their wives or their infants will be feeding in these 1,000 days. And now so this will be based on again the concept of the bracelet, the 4 food groups, and that's how I think the fathers will take away the message of creating this dietary diversity in every meal that their wives or their children will take. Thank you.
Okay, well, I must say thank you very much for engaging in this. I presented you really with 3 challenges, didn't I? And that's why I think this isn't an easy topic, it's not an easy issue, but it's really crucial, because if we're going to adapt these materials for our students or our trainees or our community groups or our policyholders, then we really need to think about these things. So identifying a threshold concept, and you did well to come up with that. That takes quite a while when you understood this issue about very large ones and small ones. And then this idea of the case study, the idea of the activity and things like that, and you were getting to that in the middle of that. And this idea of having something with a video and something that's really relevant, and you can be really kind of passionate about it. And then this final thing, which I think you've all done, because if you look at the plans, you can all see what the students are doing. Yeah, that the session is student-centered and they're active throughout. We spent a lot of time on that issue about the lecture for 25 minutes and how can you make sure the students are active. And Anjali and Nilofer and others came up with these ideas of, well, you can always ask rhetorical questions, can't you, in your lecture? Yeah? So these were the results from our first piece of research. What do you think we did next? You don't get them to shout out, you're there thinking, they're active, and then you then go on to the next stage. Or people were putting questions up on the slide and saying, what do you think was in pairs? What do you think? I'm going to carry on, I'd like to discuss it in pairs and then come up with the answer. So with a lecture, we can't always depend on the students asking questions. And if they did, sometimes it's just the usual suspects, isn't it? Yeah? So that's something I think we think about. But this idea of the case study, the video, the bracelets, all these resources that we've got, making something really, really come alive. So, thank you so much for engaging in that. Chow, we just wanted to finish, didn't we, by an invitation really to join our community with this. There's the connecting information for you, and you can connect with other members, share information, attend webinars, write a blog, or propose activities. So thank you so much for coming to the session today, and all the very best, and we hope to be working with you in the future if you'd like to. Thank you.
Thank you. just one thing, if you haven't yet, please do sign the attendance list.
I left my bag in Connect, I just walked in. I wasn't planning to but anyway, yeah.